Hello everyone. Today I want to show a game played between Anatoly Karpov and Veselin Topalov in 1994 in the Hermanas tournament. Let's check out the game. It starts with d4, knight f6, knight f3 and c5 immediately, d5, e6, knight c3, knight d5, knight into d5 and e d5. This is a variation of the Benoni itself. Queen takes d5 and bishop e7. e4, black castles, and a known move here is bishop to c4, just developing the bishop on an active square, and after d6 the queen goes back to d3, preventing any bishop e6 ideas. Knight can come to d7, and the game continues over there. But over here, after castles, we have bishop e2, a more modest development, d6, and white castles. Knight to c6. One idea is knight b4. Another option could have been knight e7 with the idea of, let's say, rook d1 and then knight f6, pushing the queen back. That was also possible. However, we had knight c6 and c3. Bishop e6, developing and hitting the queen. Queen h5 and h6. Another option was d5 immediately and rook d1, preventing a capture on e4, but d4. White could push e5. Bishop could go to d3 and create some threats on the king side, because now the e4 square has been vacated. That would have been also possible. However, h6 was played and rook d1, putting some pressure on the d file, and rook to e8. The bishop on e7 might tuck back to f8 at some point of time. Bishop f4, and that's exactly what happens. Bishop f8, just a nice defensive move to guard against any future bishop into h6 ideas. Knight to d2, so knight is going to read out itself. g6, pushing the queen back. Queen f3 and d5 finally, and queen g3. Queen to e7 was played. Other alternatives could have been bishop to g7, but then knight to c4 comes. The d6 square looks a bit attractive for the white pieces, and of course the knight can't be captured because the pawn on d5 is pinned. d4 would have led to e5 perhaps, freeing up the e4 square for the knight. That was also possible. However, queen e7 was played. E into d5 and bishop into d5. So now the e file is open and there's already a queen and rook battery. Bishop to f1 and queen f6. Rook a to d8 can come in later on. So the last piece will be developed. Knight to b3 and rook a d8, as was the idea initially. Rook to d2. Bishop e6, offering a trade of rooks. And bishop c7 by Karpov. So the idea is that while he's not opposed to a rook trade, he doesn't want to trade on d8 and allow the other rook to gain control of the active d file, which is the only one of the only two fully open files. But he's enticing black to capture on d2 and remaneuver the knight back towards the center or the king side. And that's exactly what happens. So if rook to c8, then bishop d6 could also be an alternative, and white would have control over the d file. So rook into d2 was played and knight into d2. Bishop f5. One idea could have been bishop d5. That was also possible. Queen g5, offering a queen trade, is not really favorable to some extent. But bishop f5 is fairly reasonable, and knight c4. Again, the e5 square could be important. So right now it's controlled by three pieces on both sides. But the knight can also can remaneuver to e3 and hit the bishop, threatening some pawn structures for black. That is possible. Rook e4 and knight e3 anywhere. Bishop to c8, not allowing a trade on f5. Bishop e6 and bishop d3 could also be played. That could also have been one of the variations. But after bishop c8, first rook d1, Rook goes back to e8 and h3, just taking away, just making some breathing room for the king, so no back rank issues later on. Queen g5, now Topalov goes and offers the queen trade, but queen f3, avoiding. King to g7. Instead of this move, perhaps knight e5 was an option, but queen d5 would be fairly strong. It centralizes the queen, keeps reasonable control for white over the position. King g7, not the most accurate though. Bishop f4, hitting the queen, and queen goes to e7. In fact, we'll see what the king being on g7 actually does later on. Knight to d5 first, hitting the queen, and queen e4. And here is the beauty of the first beauty of the game. We have knight f6. So in fact, perhaps it's better that had the king been on g8, the queen would never have come on e4 at all, because it would have been a fork, and Topalov would never have played it. But the king being on g7, perhaps Topalov missed this idea. Absolutely superb calculation by Karpov that after king into f6, which is played because the rook and the queen were forked, and of course if queen into f3, avoiding that, knight into e8 is actually a check. So this is another problem, king being on g7. Knight into e8 comes with check, so the fork really is deadly. So king into f6, bishop e5. I've sacked a piece, let me sack another, and the bishop has to be captured. It's a double check. The king can't go to e6 because the queen would hang on e4. So the king has to capture the piece. And now after queen into e4 and king into e4, the king is so far up the board in the middle game. Rook e1 check, and it skewers the rook on e8. King goes to f5 and into e8, and now this hits two pieces. Two bishops are hanging, and you can save only one on one move. Bishop e6 and rook into f8. Bishop into a2 and rook c8, and that is where Topalov resigned, because rook c7 is coming and the rook is going to be a pig on the 7th rank. It will gobble up all the pawns, and the endgame is completely winning for white. So a wonderful victory for Anatoly Karpov. Well, that's the game. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you soon for the next game.